I want to talk to you about actually sent in some questions about this to NIH, but then we hit the shutdown and you guys weren't able to respond to it. So, since I have you here, what I sent in was there was a New York Times article about a study, and it was in one of the Lancet journals. So I think it's Lancet's Infectious Diseases. So it's a good journal. And it talked about long COVID. And what it did was what the study concluded was that if you were vaccinated, you were less likely to get long COVID. And so so this appears in the New York Times. And I already knew when because so the NIH put out a bunch of funding for long COVID. A friend of mine who's at one of the big research institutions on the East Coast was a part of applying for that grant that their university won. They got a big study center grant. And I was talking to this researcher later and I was like, how are you studying long COVID? Because they haven't even defined what it means right now. So like they were passing out money from the NIH to study something that did not even have a medical definition. So I knew this was going on. So when I read the New York Times piece, I pulled up the study and I looked at it, and here's what I found when you look at the methods. What it tells you is that they studied long COVID in patients from people who were vaccinated, unvaccinated, from January of 2022 till January of 2024, okay? And they were studying what they called PSC, which is this way of defining long COVID, right? But
Post-acute,
that definition for long COVID was not even put out until, let me see what it was, May of 2023, more than halfway through the study. And I'm reading this, I'm like, how are you studying something that you don't even know what it is that you're studying until more than halfway through the study? What is the value of this study, first off? And then how did the New York Times not read this study the way I did and realize that this study is kind of bunk? And I feel like that we put out all this money to study long COVID. There are people that I know who have long COVID. And from the beginning, I and other people that I've spoken to, researchers, have all been concerned about what the value is of the data we're getting back when we were like, because this guy over here is studying long COVID that he thinks means this. This other researcher is studying long COVID over here, and they define long COVID with all these other things. And it's not like depression, where if you're a guy at University of Washington and you're studying depression, and you're a guy at Yale University and you're studying depression, they're both studying the same things. They know what it means because it has a definition. Everyone's just studying like their own particular idea of what they think long COVID is. And so what is the value of all that data when you try to combine it together? Because everyone's studying a different thing.
I mean, so long COVID is one of those things where we spent, I think, $1.5 billion or more
It was a
between
lot of
20.
money.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of money. And we've not really made a lot of progress in addressing the needs of long COVID patients. And it's one of those things where there's patients are understandably frustrated. A lot of the money that was spent on long COVID at NIH between 2021 and 2025 or 2024 was on trying to get a definition of long COVID. As you say, that study that I looked at that study, the Lancet study, and it struggled with a definition of long COVID. It called this post-acute sequela of COVID-19, PASC.
Right.
It was like one of these. It was like they defined it based on symptoms, and some of the symptoms are quite nonspecific. Right? Do you have
Right.
headaches? Are you fatigued? So the definition of long COVID is it's still challenging. I've seen now some recent work that because what the key thing is, how do you distinguish long COVID from other post-acute sequela of infectious diseases? There's things where you can get the flu and you can get longer term outcomes
Right.
from the flu,
Right.
right? There are other disease conditions that sometimes produce symptoms that overlap substantially with long COVID.
Right.
Lyme disease, for instance, I've heard, right, and others,
Or
ME/CFS.
my MECFS,
Yeah,
is another one that like they're very, very, someone that I know thinks they got MECFS because they got a viral infection. They think that that's what triggered the whole thing.
an old med school colleague of mine just did a really interesting study using on Epstein-Barr virus and some sort of long-term consequences of Epstein-Barr virus. Anyway, so the point is that it's very difficult to distinguish long COVID from some of these other things, and it's important to be able to distinguish because the treatment that you might have might be different for long COVID versus long flu or long EBV or whatever, right?
Right.
And we spent $1.5 billion. We didn't, that $1.5 billion did not produce a clean definition.
Right.
Um, and people are
I mean,
still
just so you
arguing over the
know,
definition.
the person that I first spoke about this with on the at the university on the East Coast, the MD PhD researcher out there, he pulled out of this study specifically because he saw these problems coming. He helped to win the grant, and he's like, "I don't want to be involved in this. This seems like really messed up. I can't like I'm going to go back to my regular research."
Yeah, well, I mean, I read that study. There were lots of problems with that study. The one you identify is absolutely true, like because they didn't have a definition of long COVID until 2023, I think it was, and yet they used data from before based on clinical diagnoses, somehow inferring long COVID before the definition like a clean code existed. So it had some methodological problems like that. The bigger methodological problem with that study was that it looked at kids, but it looked at kids who were like went to the doctor because they had COVID. Well,
Right.
most kids, I mean, COVID infection was really mild acutely for most kids. And so it wouldn't have necessarily produced a doctor visit. So they're
Right.
missing a lot of people who never showed up to the doctor. A lot of kids who never showed up to the doctor. Their denominators are wrong. Anyways, there were a lot of methodological problems with that study.
Okay, so I want to ask you something about this because I this gets into so like you agree with me that this study had serious problems, but like here's the thing that happened. That study made it into a very prestigious journal, right? And then it made it out of that journal onto the page of the New York Times. And I just feel like so much of the discussion we've been having around long COVID, which, there's apparently millions of people with this condition, tens of millions of people with this condition in the United States, and we're not even studying it effectively, and we're having these like weird misinformed discussions about it, like in the academic literature and in the media. I think it's very frustrating, like for people who have these who are really are sick, and we didn't spend. I mean, I'll tell you flat out, I think we threw a bunch of money away from the NIH.
Yeah,
We should
I
have
think that that
defined
money did not produce.
we should have defined this condition first. When I first saw it, I thought like we should put out some money first so that the community agrees upon a definition of what they're going to study. Then we release more money. Once we agreed upon what we're studying, we have a definition of what we're studying. Then let's start to study. Even if the definition is wrong, let's agree upon a definition so we're all looking at the same thing. And I just feel like they just threw the money out, and it's very frustrating.
Well, I mean, the money didn't produce the result I think that was anticipated. Like we didn't get a clean definition. We didn't get treatment. What I've decided with long COVID is that I don't want to wait for answers for patients. And the patient community has developed a lot of ideas for what seems to work for some people.
Right.
So I directed what the remaining long COVID money to focus on testing treatments that that show promise in making the lives of long COVID patients better. I think that sort of empirical focus is sort of a better use of the money now. We've learned a lot. Long COVID patients have suffered, and that suffering, while terrible, has produced some knowledge about how to manage the condition and potentially get better. I want to I want to do rigorous assessments of that knowledge so that that knowledge can be used by other people. I've also seen in the long COVID community, I've seen lots of like companies try to take advantage of them, frankly, Paul, with
Oh
things that
yeah,
are not
sure.
well tested.
Of course, of course.
So I think the best thing that we can do for them now is to assess rigorously the things that are out there and take their lived experience seriously in forming hypotheses for which things to look at. It's going to be I'm actually kind of hopeful. Like we did a long COVID symposium with Secretary Kennedy a few months ago, where some amazing researchers were sharing their ideas about what we might take step forward. I'm hopeful that within the next year, we will have some potential breakthroughs. But we'll see. To me, the key thing is let's focus on things that look like they're promising and might work, and test them rigorously so we can get good information out to the community.
Because, I think, when the next pandemic comes along, we're calling it long COVID, but really it's just, extended effects of a viral infection. The next virus that comes along, we're going to see similar things. We're not going to call it long COVID. It's going to be long, whatever that virus is. So this issue is not going away. It's going to keep coming up again and again. I just feel like we had a chance on really trying to define this issue. And I think we just blew money out the door So that's my take on it. I want to switch over to
Actually, Paul,
another
before you
issue.
switch, one last idea on this. Long COVID, uh, I think, is a immunological overreaction.
Right. That's
But
what I've
that's
heard from some
one
people.
theory of it. That's one
Right.
theory of it, right? And it shows you then the importance of studying immunology together with infectious disease by having the pillars of the NIAID be allergy, infectious disease, and allergy and immunology, and then and infections. Having those things together, those be the two primary things that NIAID is focused on, having those focus be on the patient and the reaction of the patient to the pathogen. That entire focus then reshifts how we think about managing long COVID, as well as any other potential long-term effects of infections. I think like thinking about it in that way is going to be very productive, not just for long COVID, but for many, many other things in the future.